The glass didn't shatter. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. How it just landed on the marble floor with a dull, heavy thud and rolled under the table. Still whole, still intact, while the room went completely silent. Zora Whitmore had set it down too hard. Everyone in that dining room knew it. She had reached across the table to refill her wine, misjudged the distance, and the glass had slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. And in that half-second before anyone spoke, Nia Caldwell had bent down, retrieved it, and set it back on the tablecloth without a word. That was when Zara looked at her and said, "You'd make a wonderful server, Nia. You really do have the instincts for it." Nobody laughed. But nobody said anything, either. Nia had smiled, the specific kind of smile she had perfected over 11 years of Whitmore family dinners, the one that didn't reach her eyes, the one that meant "I heard you and I'm choosing not to respond," and she had lifted her own glass and taken a slow sip of water. Her husband, Craig Whitmore, sitting to her left, had said nothing. That was the first time, or rather, that was the first time with that particular audience. The comments about her instincts, her origins, her suitability for certain kinds of work, those had begun much earlier. They had begun, if Nia was honest with herself, on the first night Craig had brought her to a Whitmore family dinner, and his mother, Eleanor, had asked her pleasantly, with a warm and practiced smile, what part of Africa her family was from. "Atlanta," Nia had said. "Originally," Eleanor had clarified, still smiling. "Georgia," Nia had said. "Originally." Eleanor had moved on to the wine selection. Craig had laughed, a little too quickly, and steered the conversation toward the upcoming gala, and Nia had understood in that moment. The way you understand things that you don't yet have words for, that she had just failed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. She had met Craig Whitmore at a conference in San Francisco. This was 12 years ago, when she was 31 and working 70-hour weeks as the founding CEO of a company called Oren Systems, a logistics software firm she had built from a studio apartment in Oakland with $40,000 and a refusal to sleep more than 4 hours a night for approximately 18 months. The company had 19 employees at that point. It would eventually have 412. Craig had been at the conference, representing his family's investment firm, Whitmore Capital. He was charming in the way that men from old money are often charming. Effortlessly, in a way that looked natural but was, in fact, the product of decades of careful cultivation. He had a good laugh. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered what you'd said 20 minutes earlier and referred back to it in a way that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. They had talked for 3 hours at the conference reception. He had called the next morning. She had known about the family before she met them. She wasn't naive. She had done what any woman in her position would do. She had looked them up, read about them, formed a reasonable picture. The Whitmores were old Virginia money, the kind that went back several generations and expressed itself in foundation boards and charitable galas and a certain way of standing at parties, slightly apart from the noise, as if the party were happening for their benefit rather than the other way around. They had never been the kind of family that would be overtly hostile to a woman like her. They had just never been the kind of family that would accept her, either. She had understood this and had chosen Craig anyway. She had loved him genuinely in the beginning, and she had believed. The way people in love believe things that require a certain deliberate refusal to look too closely. That it would get better. That they would warm to her. That time would smooth what discomfort remained. 11 years had not smoothed it. The family reunion was held every summer at the Whitmore estate in Charlottesville, Virginia. It was 4 days long. It involved approximately 60 people, many of whom Nia had met 12 or 15 times, and who still, upon seeing her, arranged their faces into the particular expression of polite uncertainty that meant they were not sure of her name. This year, it was held in late July. The weather was perfect in the way that Virginia weather in late July is never actually perfect. It was hot and bright and humid, and the kind of beautiful that makes you sweat through your dress before 11 in the morning. Nia arrived with Craig on a Friday afternoon. She had packed carefully, as she always did for these weekends. She had learned, over the years, what kinds of clothes the Whitmore family responded to, and she had dressed accordingly, in the understated, expensive way that said, "I belong here," without making anyone feel that she was trying to prove it. She wore a cream linen blazer on the drive up. She had her hair pressed and pinned. She carried a bottle of Burgundy for Eleanor that had cost $400 because $400 was the number at which Eleanor would accept a gift as adequate without seeming too impressed by it. Eleanor met them in the driveway. She kissed Craig on both cheeks. She received the wine from Nia with a brief smile and handed it immediately to the woman standing behind her, who was, in fact, on Eleanor's household staff. And then she turned back to Craig and began asking about his flight, which had not been a flight at all but a 3-hour drive, and Nia followed them inside, carrying her own bag, which Craig had not taken from her, because Craig, in the presence of his mother, had a way of forgetting small things. The first evening was a cocktail reception on the back lawn. There were perhaps 40 people there, in various configurations of linen and resort wear. Nia moved through the crowd with the practiced ease she had spent years developing. She had learned, in business, how to work a room, how to make people feel that they had her full attention, how to extract herself from conversations without leaving anyone feeling dismissed. She was good at it. She was excellent at it, actually. It was one of the things Craig had fallen in love with. She found herself near the bar, speaking with Craig's uncle, a retired federal judge named Harlan Whitmore, who was telling her about a fishing trip he had taken in Montana. She was listening, genuinely listening, because Harlan, unlike most of the Whitmores, actually had interesting things to say. When she noticed that the cluster of women near the rose garden had stopped talking, she didn't look directly. She had learned not to look directly, but she was aware of them the way you are aware of something cold in a warm room. Craig's sister, Pam, was in that group, and Pam's best friend, whose name was Lyndon, who had been Craig's girlfriend for 2 years in his late 20s, and who had never, not once in 11 years, let Nia forget it. Nia heard her own name. Not called, not directed at her, just dropped into a sentence, in the way that people say names when they're discussing someone who is standing close enough to hear, and they know it. She turned back to Harlan and asked about the size of the trout. The incident, when it happened, was on the 3rd day. Sunday afternoon. A late family lunch, the kind that lasted 3 hours and required 2 pitchers of sweet tea, and eventually migrated from the formal dining room to the back terrace. Craig had been drinking since noon. This was not unusual for him at Whitmore family events. The alcohol didn't change him dramatically. He didn't become loud, or mean, or erratic. It just loosened, gradually, whatever thin restraint he maintained when he was trying to be the version of himself that Nia needed him to be. There were 63 people at that lunch. Nia counted them afterward. Not at the time. At the time she was not counting anything, because at the time she was focused on surviving the meal, which required a particular quality of attention that left no room for census-taking. The argument began quietly, the way the worst arguments do. Craig had said something about the Memphis expansion. Oren Systems was in the process of opening a new distribution hub, and it had been in the press that week, and his brother, Owen, who was seated across the table, had made a comment, a light comment, delivered with a smirk, something about how Nia must be working very hard to manage all those employees, with the emphasis in exactly the wrong place. The emphasis that meant how surprising, the emphasis that meant who would have thought. "I do work hard," Nia said. She kept her voice level. 14 years of it. "Of course," Owen said. He picked up his fork. It might have ended there. But Craig was on his 4th drink, and Craig, at his 4th drink, had a tendency to overcorrect, to leap to Nia's defense in a way that was less about defending her and more about performing something for his family, about showing them that he was still in control of his household, his life, his choices. He said something to Owen. Owen responded. Their voices stayed low, but the edges of the conversation sharpened, and the people near them went quiet, the way people go quiet when they are watching something that might get worse. Then Owen said something. Nia heard it clearly, every syllable, about how maybe, if Craig had married someone from his own world, they wouldn't have to see their family name in the business press every time his wife needed to prove something. The table went still. What happened next happened in the space of about 2 seconds. Craig's hand came up, and for one moment, Nia thought he was reaching for his glass. But he wasn't. The sound was sharp and flat, the way these sounds always are. Not like in the movies. Nothing dramatic. Just a specific sound that Nia had not heard directed at her own body before, and that she felt in her teeth as much as her face. She did not move. She did not speak. She sat completely still with her hand pressed to the left side of her face, and she looked at her plate. 63 people. The federal judge, a state senator, someone from the governor's office, Craig's college roommate, who was now a district attorney, 3 of Eleanor's friends who sat on hospital boards, Pam, who had known Nia for 11 years, Lyndon, who had never liked her but was also a woman. Not one of them spoke. Owen, Craig's brother, the man who had started all of it, he laughed. Not a big laugh. A small one, compressed, the kind of laugh that tries to pass itself off as surprise. And he said, his voice low but audible to everyone within 6 feet, "Guess she got a little too comfortable." Craig did not look at Nia. He was staring at the tablecloth. His face had already shifted into the expression she recognized. The one that meant he was already composing an apology he would deliver privately. Later, the one that would reframe what had happened, soften its edges, explain it as something it was not. Nia stood. She did not knock anything over. She pushed her chair back with both hands, and she stood, and she walked. Not fast, not stumbling, just walked, her heels on the stone of the terrace, and she went inside. She walked through the formal dining room. She walked through the corridor with the family portraits on the wall. She walked to the study near the east wing, which was the only room in the house she had ever liked, because it had a window that faced the garden and a door that locked from the inside. She sat in the leather chair near the window, and she put her hand back to her face, and she breathed. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She didn't take it out. She sat for a long time, with the window light on her, and the sounds of the party continuing outside, muffled, distant. The clink of glasses, someone's laugh, the low bass of conversation resuming, as it always does. Because life at parties continues regardless of what has just happened. She was thinking about something her grandmother had said to her. Once, years ago, when Nia was 12 years old and had come home crying after a girl at school had said something that had taken Nia 3 weeks to fully understand the meaning of. Her grandmother had pulled her onto the couch and held her and said, "Baby, some people's opinion of you is none of your business. Your only job is to know what you're worth." She had built a company on that. She had built a life on that. She had also, she understood now, sitting in this chair, in this room, in the home of a family that had spent 11 years making her feel like a guest who had overstayed, she had also made one very significant error in the application of her grandmother's lesson. She had confused knowing what she was worth with waiting for someone else to confirm it. She did not return to the party. Around 5 in the afternoon, Craig's youngest cousin, a girl of about 22, who was one of the few Whitmores who had always been kind to Nia, knocked on the study door and brought her a glass of water. Her name was Bex. She had just started law school. She sat with Nia for a few minutes without saying much, which was exactly right, and then she left. An hour later, the senator's wife, Nia didn't know her well, had spoken to her perhaps 3 times over the years, knocked and came in and sat down across from Nia and said, in a voice that was quiet and careful, "I owe you an apology for staying silent. We all do." She said it simply, without embellishment. Nia thanked her and meant it. Craig did not come. By 7 o'clock, the immediate family had gathered in the main sitting room for what Nia understood was a kind of damage control meeting, the sort of administrative response that old money families deploy when something has cracked the surface of an event that was supposed to be curated. She was not invited to this meeting. She heard it happening. The low voices, the door pulled not quite shut. She was in the corridor, having come out of the study to get her phone from her bag, when she heard Eleanor's voice, very clear, saying, "This is exactly why I said from the beginning." Nia did not stop to hear the rest of it. She had heard enough of those sentences in 11 years. She knew where they ended. She went back to the room she and Craig shared, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened her phone. There were 47 notifications. This was not unusual. She ran a company. She had a communications team. Her phone was always producing notifications. She was scrolling past them. Conference call request, board memo, PR team flag, investor update, when one of them stopped her. It was from her communications director, Tasha, sent 40 minutes ago. The subject line was 3 words, "Turn on CNN," and then a second message from Tasha, sent 11 minutes later, "Also Fox, also Bloomberg. Nia, your phone is about to start going insane if it hasn't already." She turned on the television in the room, the small one mounted above the fireplace. She switched it to CNN. The segment was already running. It was a business piece, the kind they did on Friday evenings, when markets had closed, and there was space in the broadcast schedule for something longer. She recognized the format. She had been on CNN before twice, for shorter segments. This one was different. This one was longer. This one had a lower third graphic that read, in white text on a dark background, "Oren Systems, the billion-dollar company you've never heard of." Her face was on the screen. Her name was on the screen, Nia Caldwell, founder and CEO, Oren Systems. The anchor, a woman with a precise voice and excellent posture, was saying, "What is arguably the most significant logistics technology acquisition of the decade?" The Department of Defense confirmed this afternoon that Oren Systems has been awarded a 15-year federal contract valued at approximately $4.2 billion, making Caldwell, at 42, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country and the wealthiest black woman in the history of the American technology sector. Nia sat on the edge of the bed and watched herself on television. She had known about the contract announcement. Of course she had. She had spent 14 months negotiating it, and the formal press release had gone out at 4 p.m., which was while she was still sitting in the study. She simply had not reached her phone until now. She turned the volume up, slightly, started Oren Systems at 31 from her apartment in Oakland, California. The anchor continued. Early investors passed. Several venture capital firms said the model was too niche. Caldwell funded the first 2 years largely out of personal savings and a second mortgage on a property in East Oakland. She listened. She had told this story before, in interviews, at keynotes, at conferences where people asked her how she had done it, and she answered them honestly, because she believed that honesty about difficulty was more useful than the curated version. But she had not thought about that apartment in a while. She had not thought about those first 2 years in a while. She was thinking about them now. There was a knock at the door. It was not Craig. It was Pam, Craig's sister, Pam, who had known Nia for 11 years and had said nothing at the lunch table that afternoon. Pam was standing in the doorway with her phone in her hand and an expression on her face that Nia did not immediately know how to classify. It was somewhere between apology and something else, something harder to name. "The television," Pam said. "Is that?" "Yes," Nia said. Pam looked at the screen. She looked at Nia. She looked at the screen again. 4 billion and 200 million, Nia said. "Yes." There was a pause. On the television, the anchor was now showing a graphic of Oren Systems' revenue growth from 2013 to the present. A line that went up, and then sharply up again, and then nearly vertical in the last 3 years. "Nia," Pam said. Her voice had changed. Something in it had softened that Nia had never heard soft before. "I'm sorry. For today. I should have." "You should have," Nia agreed. She said it without anger. Just plainly, because it was the true thing, and she had spent 11 years not saying the true things, and she was very, very tired. By 8 o'clock, the sitting room had become the kind of space that forms itself around a crisis. People gravitating toward a center, speaking in low voices, looking at phones. Nia understood from Bex, who came and found her again, that the senator had made a call. that Craig had been removed from the property by two of his cousins and was currently at the house of a family friend in Charlottesville, and that the local police had been notified. That Eleanor, upon seeing the news broadcast, had gone to her bedroom and was not responding to knocks on her door. That Owen had gotten in his car and left. Nia moved through the sitting room slowly. The room was full of people she had known for over a decade. People who had watched her be called a server, watched her be pushed outside the frame of family photographs, watched her sit at 100 tables where she was treated as peripheral, and who had said nothing. Some of them looked at her now with expressions she recognized as shame. Some looked at her with something more complicated, something that was not quite shame and not quite respect, but was trying to become both simultaneously. Harlan, the federal judge, found her near the doorway. He was a tall man, 70 years old, and he had the bearing of someone who had spent decades being the most authoritative person in any room he entered. He stood in front of Nia, and he was not authoritative. He was just old and a little diminished, and he said, "I should have intervened. I'm sorry, Nia." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He nodded. He didn't seem surprised by the answer. He had been a judge for 30 years. He knew what accountability sounded like. Lyndon, Craig's former girlfriend, Pam's best friend, the woman who had spent 11 years treating Nia as an interruption, was standing near the fireplace when Nia passed. She said nothing. She just watched Nia move through the room, and Nia could feel it, that watching, and she did not stop. She stopped at the window. Outside, the lawn was dark now, the lights of the estate illuminating the garden, and it was a beautiful property. She had always thought it was a beautiful property, even when everything else about it exhausted her. She stood at the window for a moment and breathed. Her phone rang. It was Tasha, her communications director. "I've been trying to reach you," Tasha said. "I know. I saw the segment." "The segment, Nia, it's running on 4 networks. Bloomberg is doing a longer profile. The Wall Street Journal wants a comment by 9. Forbes already pushed something online. I need to know if you want me to run point or if you want to do the interviews yourself." Nia looked at the reflection of the room in the darkened glass of the window. All those people behind her. All that complicated silence. "Set up the Bloomberg interview for Tuesday," she said. "Tell the Journal I'll comment directly. And Tasha, set up a press availability for Monday morning. If they want to cover the contract, I want to be the one to talk about it." "Got it," Tasha said. "Are you okay?" Nia considered the question. "I think I'm getting there," she said. She left Charlottesville the next morning, before the house woke up. She drove herself. She had her own car. She had always insisted on driving herself to and from these weekends, a small insistence that Craig had never understood the significance of, and that she had never explained. The sun was just coming over the hills when she turned out of the estate's long gravel drive, and the light was low and specific, and the color of something she didn't have a word for. She did not cry on the drive home. She had thought she might, but she didn't. What she felt instead was something closer to the specific relief that comes when you have been holding your breath for a very long time and you finally stop. She stopped for coffee at a rest stop just past Culpeper. There was a woman working behind the counter, about 60, with a name tag that said Ruth Ann, and a no-nonsense way of moving that reminded Nia of her grandmother. Ruth Ann poured her a large coffee without asking what size, looked at Nia once, and said, "Long night?" "Long 11 years, Nia said. Ruth Ann nodded, as if this were a perfectly ordinary thing to say at 6:45 in the morning, which, in Ruth Ann's experience, it probably was. "Coffee helps," she said. "Only a little, but it helps." Nia thanked her, and meant it, and drove the rest of the way home. The divorce was filed 4 months later. The settlement took 8 months after that, and it was quiet. As these things go when one party has nothing the other party needs. Craig did not contest it. She suspected he was relieved, or that some part of him had known for a long time how it would end. She had known too. She had known for longer than she admitted, and she was done being in the business of not admitting things. She bought a house in Oakland, near where she had grown up. Not the studio apartment, a real house, with a garden, and room for the dining table she had always wanted, the large one, the kind that could seat 12 if necessary. She did not host any dinners that required 12 seats in the first year, but she set the table sometimes, on Sunday mornings, and sat at the head of it, alone, drinking coffee and reading, and it occurred to her on more than one occasion that this, just this, exactly this, was what she had been trying to get home to for 11 years. She thought sometimes about the study at the Whitmore estate, the leather chair, the garden window, the locked door. She thought about sitting in that chair with the sounds of the party outside and her grandmother's voice in her head, and she thought about what it had taken, what it had cost, in years and in silence, to finally understand that knowing what you're worth is not a passive condition. It is not something you can know privately, in a locked room, while the party continues without you. It is something you have to live out loud. She had spent 14 years building a company that proved she had always known that. She had spent 11 years in a house where she had temporarily forgotten it. She did not intend to forget it again.